Welcome to our conversation for our ECNI 833 course on coding and makerspace. Today we are very excited to have Bryan Sanders with us to talk about coding and makerspace.
Yeah, and I just have a little bio right from Bryan's
Ooh,
website.
oh,
He's
cool.
he currently works with elementary school students in an inclusive approach to computer programming, robotics, and game design. He has a project for sharing lesson plans, as well as a discussion group focused on rethinking education. And I was actually lucky enough to join in that a few times this summer, and what a great think tank it is. I really
That was
encourage
fun.
people to, yeah, I encourage people to check it out too. Um, so starting in the mid 1990s, as an educator, he continued to work and refine his practice, and he blends critical theory, technology, and constructivism. Uh, he received his doctorate in education from Loyola Marymount University, and his dissertation was on Towards a Unified Computer Learning Theory, Critical Techno-Constructivism, which merged seminal texts from John Dewey, Paulo Freire, hopefully I said that name right, and of course the guy we know and love so much, Seymour Papert. Welcome, Bryan.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Um,
I'm very excited to meet you, Bryan, and I would like to start with my first question. Do you believe that being immersed in coding creates thinkers and learners that are fluent in mathematical thinking? Is this an efficient way to learn math?
That's a good question. Efficient. It probably is more efficient. I think the idea that we get kids to play games, with numbers and numerals, and that to me is probably the best way to get them to become fluent in mathematics. I think I'm very anti worksheet, and it's I'm also anti test. Like it's just I don't see much value in making things like every Thursday we'll have a test at 10 o'clock in math. Like why? There's so the efficiency is an interesting thing to pick up on, because I think that like when I look at what works for me when I'm trying to think in mathematics, um, I'm always just playing games. I'm always just like moving things around in my head and then trying to see if that was right, and then grab a piece of paper and and test my mind to see if whether or not like I could do it in my head. And so like I'm just constantly moving things around. I'm always like changing letters into numerical value, and like trying to like I'll look at a word and I'll just like for fun I'll see, can I make that word into the number zero?
Mhm.
I have no idea why. I'm just kind of interested in it, like on the back burner in my head, like always processing different ways of playing with mathematics. And so when kids are doing things, right, when they're immersed in making something that is going to involve mathematics, it's certainly going to be far more efficient for them to learn. It's just the sequence. I think that's the only issue that people have. What's the sequence of learning, and is it necessary to do things in a prescribed sequence, right? And that's one of the big things that I was studying when I was working on my degree. Is like, well, whose sequence is this, right?
mhm.
Like, where does it come from? Like, what assumptions is it built upon? And typically, it's easy to look at all of those standardized curricula as being you know very Eurocentric, um, and mostly white Eurocentric, right?
Mhm.
And so it's like it's really hard to, as we keep getting better at, as humans globally, as we get better at becoming aware of how to include diverse voices from all kinds of races, ethnicities, creeds, beliefs, etc. How could we continue in our schools? Why is it so slow to adapt in the school system? right? So that efficient question is really interesting to me, because like that to me is like that's the key. Like why? What are we using to measure efficiency, and what assumptions is that measurement built upon, right? Because ultimately that leads to what the experiences that the kids are having.
For sure, yeah.
That seems like to come back from the Industrial Revolution, right? Trying to weed people out and that type of thing, and just train the workers. Where hopefully we've advanced through that. And I really, what you say really strikes a chord with me. You need a different mindset, and just there, and you talk and play, right? Play is so important, and
Yeah,
it's okay to make a mistake. Actually, mistakes are encouraged, because that's where you learn the most. And to just
right,
throw something out there and see where it takes you.
Yeah,
right,
absolutely.
right.
I
What
found it
else?
very
Yeah,
interesting that you mentioned the Eurocentric, because I grew up in Europe and my whole life was worksheet and no play. And when I moved to Canada and I went back to redo my education program, and I actually took a class how to teach math for students, I was surprised and in shock. Well, what the first question I asked, why would you do this? Like, why would you teach them through play and manipulatives? And that was the first time in my life when I actually experienced working with manipulatives. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, like this can be so different. Actually you have an understanding what behind all those concepts are, right? And
right.
it was
Yeah,
a whole
and
new
the
world.
right. Yeah, no, it's interesting. Yeah, the I mean, and adding manipulatives is certainly great, and like in adding computer science components to teaching mathematics and or anything is great, and like but like there's still like I'm always concerned that we're not remaking the experience, right? We're adding another way to express. We're saying, you know, why well, okay, so like now is the time in the class where you will go and build something with your hands. Like, why is it reserved for a particular time? It's like the same kind of thinking, like with like in American high school, like 11th grade, 12th grade. Once the AP exam, the advanced placement exams are done in May, very typically it's like a lot of teachers have this collective sigh of relief, and the kids have this collective sigh of relief, and now they really get to go and spend the last 5 or 6 weeks of school doing the class properly, which means there are all these projects, there are all these ways to express yourself. They're so different. They're no longer tied to the exam as the only way of thinking and doing things. It's like what it's so strange. Like we're so beholden unto something. It's like a hypnosis. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that stuff is wild. I don't know what it's going to take. I mean, I think the pandemic's helping somewhat, strangely enough.
Yeah, several
But
linings.
yeah, because like we're just forced at home. We can't do all of the sort of jail tactics that we used to do when we were in person, because it's so much harder to police the kids, right? So you have to do things differently. It's so stupid and awful that we have to have people dying and everyone's stuck at home to change education. I don't understand that either. But here we are.
Good, Brandon. Good point.
So I'm just looking at the question, make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, I mean the coding part, the programming part, absolutely. Like that to me is like the more that you have to think, and force yourself to learn logic and syntax and spelling, right? Like in pursuit of a larger goal, right? Because usually that subtask in programming something is so minor, but it might take you an hour. Like it's like part of some larger vision you have for what the program is really supposed to do, but you're stuck on like 2 lines, right, for an hour. That's brilliant. Like to me, like that is what kids should be doing all the time.
I agree with
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
That'd be one nice thing to see, is that coding just became a tool and a way of learning rather than just a separate on the side. Here, let's do our hour of code. Okay, we checked that box. Let's move on. It'd be nice if it became just a natural way to learn and to figure
Right,
things out.
right, exactly. I see we got our countdown, so we'll do
Yes. No.
another.
Yeah.
We'll
I see
start
that
another
there too.
meeting in 10 minutes. That's fine.
Moving on. Should we move on to question 2?
Sure.
Okay. So, does making mean making anything? And are there some experiences or materials that are more valuable than others?
That's a good one. That this came up too, like in some of the big discussions of late, like what is making, making up your own mind, right? Is like that's like I think the sort of the Marvin Minsky goal, the big goal of making was like, and what Seymour Papert was really talking about. Like I just got the new version of Mindstorms because I wanted to read the new intro, and I was just looking over it again and then looking through the text again. I've read it a few times already, and then again looking at what Seymour Papert wrote. I think 20 years after, and like so he was published in 1980, and I think in 2000 he wrote a Looking Back. And then in 2020, Mitch Resnick wrote a new intro to the book. And I think those are really great little milestones in the history of what those ideas are. And like, so in 2000, Seymour Papert was already like, you all missed the idea that this is about powerful ideas. Like that would, as though that was just some sort of like tacked on phrase to the title of the book. Computers, children, and powerful ideas. It's like, well, the powerful ideas part is like not just there to make a nice title. His point was, and coming from all the work with Piaget and working with Minsky at the AI lab at MIT, was like really about like allowing people to spend the time to make their minds, to make their brains do things in new ways. And like, so that is like the top goal. Like everything else was sort of like leading to it. Like all the other projects are just expressions of, in my opinion, one attempt to try to figure out how they are designing their own mind. And like all the different, when I look back at the things I've done, like I could try like applying that. I go, oh yeah, like so this set of books that I had a bunch of kids read for years, and I kept tweaking it and like changing and trying different things to try to create this dialogue among these 8 books, say, or whatever number it was. And like my attempt to try to create the right mixture of those books being read and experienced by students was me trying to figure something out in my own head and try to make up my own mind about what I thought on this topic. And and so I think it's a really powerful notion that like this making, like it's hard, you can't really have this conversation with an 8-year-old in this kind of depth because they don't really know. Like they're just kind of like messing around with stuff, right? They're making things all the time. But like really, I think like the sort of the graduate level, the professor level overview is like, no, this is about like making comes from sort of this, trying to reorganize this nebulous space in our heads, and each one of us is doing it individually. And then even more fascinating is how we collaborate with each other, and then like how that then takes on its own life, and then it changes the way that we think too. And like so we're constantly in this dialogue of making up our minds, and then the things that we actually put into the world, right? Those are expressions at different checkpoints, at different reference points of like different experience levels, different contexts of what we're trying to work through in our heads. So now more directly answering the question, like, so I don't think that there's one particular making experience that is more powerful than another, as long as it's in pursuit always of that bigger goal and adheres to these principles of it shouldn't just be this genius hour. It shouldn't just be this hour of code. It shouldn't just be this after the May exam. It should be woven into what we do, preschool through 12th grade, and hopefully into college. So that's a whole other conversation. Colleges are. I mean, it's hard to change K-12. Like colleges, I don't know. Like I don't know how to change colleges. So I think that there's experiences or materials more valuable than others. Sometimes there are. I guess you could, like, if you gave me like 5 different kits to look at, and I could probably say, yeah, this one does this and this one does that. You could. I think that everyone just has to find. I think the most open source kit. If you're going to buy a kit, and I've certainly bought kits, like I'm always looking for the one that has the most expandability, the one that doesn't tie me into like this is right now I'm an elementary school teacher, right? So I don't want something that's going to be useless for my 3rd graders, even though it's great for K through 2. Like I want there to be something that goes for everybody, and I can put it in the right spot at the right time, and because I could have, and I have kindergartners that are ready for things that the 4th graders are doing. And sometimes I have a 5th grader who's just like, I don't know what to do. It's like, okay, so let's give you something that maybe the 1st graders are working on. Like so there shouldn't, so that's why the interchangeability of things that of experiences is so essential. And it shouldn't really be tied to whatever, this gets again to the other conversation. Like, it should never be tied to whatever the manufacturer says, like, because who knows who's guiding that thinking. Like, this is for K through 5. Like, why? Who said so? Your business department? Like, and what assumptions are they using? Like, what theory did they read? Like, what research did they do? Right? Like, so those kinds of critical, like, that's the Paulo Freire stuff that I wove into all my work. It's like, you have to constantly be thinking about, like, well, who's the audience and what's the purpose and who came up with these guidelines and what's their experience, and and question that, because I get really worried about, like, the flip side of the pandemic teaching stuff is that I get really worried about people just buying whatever large sum of money curriculum package. It's like, well, who wrote it? It's like, well, I don't know, but it doesn't really matter. Kids are at computers all day long. We need them to do work. It's like, what do you mean do work? You mean answer a bunch of questions and a bunch of who knows who wrote? Like, who was like, and this is already started. You can already Google. There are all these complaints coming out of districts that did that. They've already. It's so obvious. We could have foreseen very quickly. Like, no, you can't just buy software from. So you can't just buy a data set from somebody and expect the kids to have a meaningful experience, right?